Okay. Hi, Karina.
Hey Ed, how are ya?
I am good. I am good. Well, to our listeners, um, my name is Ed Peterson. I'm a clinical social worker, therapist, EFT therapist. This is my podcast and video vlog called Therapy, Emotion, and Sex, Conversations That Matter. And I am just tickled pink that today I get to have one of my colleagues, one of the therapists that I work with at the EFT clinic, whose name is Carina Wolff. I've got that right. Carina, right? Not Karina.
Yeah.
Is that said correctly, Carina?
Yep.
Carina Wolff, and she's terrific in lots of ways, which you'll find out about here. And we're going to talk shop, we're going to talk therapy, we're going to talk maybe a little bit about some personal things, and again, just get into the world of therapy and emotions, even talking about sex, anything we want to talk about, and especially also what it's like to be a therapist and do all this. So Carina Wolff works with me at the EFT clinic in Salt Lake City, but I'm going to let her introduce you. So could you take a minute and tell the people a little bit about you and your background and where you are right now in your work?
Yeah. Thanks, Ed. Um, I'm also a clinical social worker, which when I came to the EFT clinic, I was kind of intimidated by that. I think I was the only uh social worker at the time. Now we have a few of us. And I fell in love with EFT a few years ago. Through my own personal journey, my husband and I went through therapy that really just, I would say, not just saved, but made our relationship so much better.
Mm,
And because of that experience, I decided to go back to school. I used to be a preschool teacher. I was a preschool teacher for 15 years here. And I went back to school. So I graduated just at the beginning of, with my master's, just at the beginning of the pandemic, just got fully licensed this year. So, and loving it.
wow. And we can
Yeah.
talk more about that. That's interesting because my wife Candace and I, and Candace, who you know, Karina, is also a therapist at the EFT clinic.
Okay.
She and I also went through our therapy about 13 years ago, and it wasn't strictly traditionally EFT, but it was very connected to it. The therapists that we work with really understand attachment, and I feel the same way. I feel like that I've actually used those same words, that I feel like that the therapy helped to save our marriage and also
Mhm.
just help us really just to heal and get a much better, more loving relationship. So it sounds like we share that.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. I loved it. And it has been a different relationship. I think for us, it was, let's see, about 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I wish we would have done it much sooner.
Right. And you've been married for how long?
22 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You're a veteran.
Yeah. Yeah. 22 years. And I have a 20-year-old daughter and a 17-year-old son. I'm still trying to think of his age because he's barely turned 17 last week. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, mine are 25, 18, and 14. So we're kind of in the same boat.
Kind of in the same stage. Yeah. They're fun, challenging and fun.
Mm. Um, and also, tell, if you would, a little bit about your cultural background, where you grew up, and how that maybe has been has how that maybe has affected your career, kind of how you think about or do what you do.
Yeah. So I am from Brazil. I was born and raised in São Paulo, Brazil, and I lived there until I was 19, almost 20. That's when I moved here and married my husband. We were engaged when I moved here. Um, I don't know, for people that don't know much about South American culture, Brazilian culture especially, it's all about connection.
Mm.
I remember, growing up, we were really, really poor, but every weekend, for example, Sunday, we would have 20 plus people in this one bedroom home for lunch. And that happened, it wasn't special occasion, that was the normal. So
That's a
connection.
lot. That's a lot of people to be having a meal together.
We always had that. That was my dad's pride and joy, that everybody could come together on Sunday and have lunch. Lunch is the biggest meal in Brazil. It's kind of dinner here. And yeah, all my siblings came, cousins, nephews, nieces. So in fact, I didn't know about the meaning of extended family until I moved here. I would hear words like, oh, extended family, this is my second cousin. I'm like, what?
Like
Cousin is cousin, period.
that made no sense to you.
That made no sense to me. This concept of extended family, because family and where I come from, it's family, period. There isn't anything else attached to it.
Right.
So, so I have always, I remember graduating from high school, that's what I wanted to go to school in Brazil for psychology, because I just loved this. I loved psychology and I just loved connecting with people. That, I think when you are really poor, like I was, you really don't attach to things, you're attached to people and you're attached to relationships.
Mm.
And that has always been, to this day, my most prized possession, my relationship. So my best friends in Brazil are still my best friends 25 years later, almost 30 years later. So even though we are far apart, we are still connected. Family, I still talk to family. So that is just ingrained in, I think, who I am, and a lot of our culture is just ingrained in who we are, this
Right.
warmth of the culture.
I'm actually going to stand up because part of what we do here is we do vulnerability, and I've never really talked about this on my podcast, but I have a condition called restless leg syndrome.
Mhm.
Restless leg syndrome, or RLS, and it's something that sometimes if I sit for too long, I get these nerve pains in my legs. So I'm going to just stand up a little bit. So
Yeah, do it.
But that's fascinating to me, Carina, because I didn't know that. So like compared to general poverty in a place like Brazil, how poor were you all? Like, what was it like?
It's so interesting because I have had that question before, and time to think about it. Growing up, I did not know I was poor.
Okay.
Like I had no idea. I mean, I knew I wasn't rich because I went to a very upper class school,
Right.
not because it was private. It was just a school really far away from my neighborhood.
Right.
Took me about 2 hours to get there. My parents just sent me there because of that. It was a better education. So I would ride a bus. I would leave the house at 5:30 in the morning to be at school as a 9-year-old by myself. Because my dad didn't have money to pay for 2 bus tickets. So he would put me in a bus and say, this is the bus stop, you get off. And I would make the trek by myself. So I knew we weren't rich, but we had food.
Right.
But like I never really had like Christmas presents, for example. Like Christmas was about family. Everybody came over, we had this big feast. And that's it. We danced, we sang, we danced with one another. At midnight, we ate. That's the tradition. You eat at midnight.
Yeah.
And there were no I never had presents, and I never really missed it. I mean, I don't know that you can miss something you don't have.
Well, and what did your mom and dad both work, or just your dad?
Yeah, my dad was he worked for the local school in our neighborhood. He was a maintenance person.
Hmm.
And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she would like wash clothes for people and they would pay her just like she wouldn't per se charge. So they would just give her whatever they felt like. And she would do that by hand, by the way, because we didn't have machines, like we didn't have wash machine or dry, a dryer, I guess. So we were pretty poor, like poverty level in Brazil, even comparing to Brazil, now going back and having these two different perspectives, really poor, like
Yeah,
not upper class, really lower class. Like I
interesting.
said, our house was a 1 bedroom. There were 5 rooms in our house, a kitchen, a living room, a bedroom, and a bathroom, I guess 4
So
rooms.
you were sharing a room with 1, 2, 3,
My dad.
4 people. Yeah.
Yeah. There was all the beds were in the same bedroom, same small bedroom.
That must
Yeah.
that must be really interesting. I don't know if interesting is the right word, but I want to ask you a question about that, because my experience with Latin America is I served an LDS mission in Guatemala. And
Mm-hmm.
so I know what you're talking about, and that I lived and became really close with lots and lots of people and lots of families that sound similar to what you're talking about. Families that did have, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids. And it was a such situation in a very small, very modest places to live, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I did experience similar things in lots of these families. There was so much joy and love and
Yeah.
music and food. And I was always so amazed too that these families would always make food and bring food for us when we come
Mm-hmm.
visit, right? When clearly that wasn't easy to do. But let me ask you this. So for you, then you move to Salt Lake City when you're how old?
I was just 3 months, April, May, June, July, 4 months short of turning 20.
And then you got married about the same time.
I got married 2 weeks. So I moved here because I was engaged to my husband.
Right.
So I moved here 2 weeks before we got married.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about that kind of cultural experience or culture shock of
Yeah.
moving to Salt Lake City, Utah, having lived most of your life in Brazil. And I would imagine that when you got married to your husband, suddenly you all had a very different level of income, and your lifestyle probably changed a lot.
Yeah. Yes and no. I think so. When I moved here, shock is the right word. There was a
Okay.
cultural shock, a warmth of climate, and also of people. I instantly felt that I was out of place, didn't belong. And I had reminders along the way that really kind of this sense of not belonging. So my husband was going to school at the time. That's why we moved here.
Right.
I really never had the American dream to live in the United States. In fact, our goal was for him to finish school and move back to Brazil.
Oh,
So we were really poor students.
right.
I mean, he was a poor student. I didn't speak any English at the time. So, but to me, my lifestyle hadn't changed much because I was poor there and I'm poor here.
Interesting.
So so we lived in this tiny apartment by the U, and honestly, I didn't feel any different.
Right. Okay. So let me ask you this, and we'll get to talking about therapy too, but this is
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this, is that you said that moving here to the stage at Salt Lake City. You didn't speak English.
Mhm.
Probably learned that because you speak so well now. But you said you felt like an outsider, and there were reminders of that. Were those social experiences that you had with other people? Help us understand a little bit about what that was like. That, I mean, I would just call it sort of that outsider position.
Mhm. It was reminders. Yeah, it was explicit and implicit reminders, right? My husband's American, so I remember, for example, I mean, I have several examples, but I remember filling up our green card application. And in Brazil, I'm called white. There's not really the multiple choices of cultures or ethnicities, I guess I should say, that we have here. It's either you're white or you're black. There's not a lot to choose from. So on my birth certificate, it says a white female. So I checked the white box here,
Oh,
and I was told, you're not white. And I thought, wait a minute.
like
I'm
what are
not,
you?
I,
You're
I
like,
have been
what are you
told,
talking about?
right. I have been told for 20 years that I'm white. What are you saying? I'm not white. And they're like, no, you are Latina. And I'm like, no, I'm not.
Right.
Because we don't see ourselves like that. We are Brazilians. That in itself, it's our ethnicity.
Well, especially right, because and it goes back to Portugal, not to Spain, right? And
Right, right.
Latino has to do with Spain.
Yeah, the a lot of people would say, no, you're Spanish or you're Latino. I'm like, no. So for a while, I even was like questioning my identity. I'm like, wait a minute, I grew up for the past 20 years, I think I'm white, I'm Brazilian, and here I'm being told I'm not those things. So who am I? So for a long time after that, I would check the box other, because
Right.
I didn't know which box to check. I'm like, I know I'm being told I'm not white, even though I believed I was.
Right.
I know I'm not Spanish.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to check. So I would just check other for years and years and years. Sometimes I still do it to this day. Just I think it's a habit.
Right.
Yeah.
And what were the psychological and emotional um consequences of that, you being here again in this sort of outsider position, um like the first, I don't know, 2, 5, 10 years? Do you think that emotionally and psychologically they were really hard? Did it get easier? What was your experience like?
Um, it was really hard, to be honest. It was brutal, hard. I never felt so lonely in my life, because even though, I was married, we were happy, we were fine, but we were also super young. So there were things that we didn't know. I mean, we were figuring things out. And I am in this place where I couldn't go out by myself, because I didn't drive, I didn't speak the language, I didn't know a soul here besides my husband,
Right.
right? There, he has family here, but that's a different scenario, but I didn't know anybody. So I really was so dependent on him. And like I said earlier, from 9 years old, I was used to ride a bus 2 hours away from my house by myself
Right.
and go to school. And I did that my whole life.
So now you're here and you're almost, yeah, you're not independent, you're very dependent. And
Yeah.
I would think that maybe for a while, many years, going back to what we talk about in emotionally focused therapy and attachment, right? We talk about this need that we all have to feel emotionally safe.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I want to go to, is because I think that maybe there's some things that you could say about how, because you experienced, from what I'm hearing, feeling alone, and it was brutal. And so at some level, maybe there wasn't a kind of social, emotional safety for you. And maybe it took a number of years for you to get that. And how long did it take, do you think, until you felt like you were happy enough, secure enough here, that life started to feel much better?
Honestly, it was a good decade or so, if not more, to be honest.
Right.
I remember one time talking to Christine Holding, which we both know and love. She's my boss and the owner of the EFT, one of the owners of the EFT clinic. We were talking about a case, and she just said a sentence about that case that really hit home to me on what you're talking about. She said, she was talking about the woman's physique, and she said she's carrying a lot of pain. And I said, what? Like, how do you know that? That I just had shown a 30-second clip of my video, right?
So,
My EFT
so you
video.
had shown 30 seconds of a clip with one of your clients.
Yeah.
And Christine says, oh, clearly she's carrying a lot of pain.
Yeah. She said,
You're-
stop the
And
video.
your first, you're kind of didn't understand what she was saying.
I didn't understand. She said, stop the video. And I was like, hasn't even been a minute. Is that, our critic mind goes to, is it that bad?
Right.
And she goes, she's carrying a lot of pain. And I said, how do you know that? And she said, look at her body and her posture. She was very, very overweight, this person. And that I had tears. And when I hung up that call, I cried because that hit home so much to me.
Okay, so wait. So what do you think happened inside of you in that moment when Christine said that about your client that caused you to have that emotional reaction and then caused you to cry afterwards? What do you think was happening on the inside?
I think, well, what happened was things started to make sense to me. I moved here. I was 142 pounds. And that first 10 years, I gained a lot of weight. And I didn't understand why, because it wasn't my parents, if you ask my parents, they would say, oh, it's the American diet. And I would say, Dad, it's not. Like, we cook, at home. We didn't have money to go out and eat. Looking back, to me, I was carrying all that loneliness, all that pain, all that hurt in my body and my weight.
Yes.
And that's what it hit home to me. It spoke to me because I never understood.
And do you think you also then would have connected that maybe what was going on is, and I speak from experience personally, is that you may have during that time have done some emotional eating where food was a real comfort, and that was part of putting on weight.
Absolutely. I mean, I spend hours and hours alone, not all 10 years, but the first couple of years, because I couldn't work. I couldn't go to school. Obviously my husband was working, going to schools. So he would be gone 50, 60 hours a week between work and school. And I stayed home. The first time that I left our little apartment by myself, I got lost.
Right.
And it was a terrifying experience. I couldn't say where I lived. I had no idea where my address was, so I never did it again.
Right.
So I stayed inside of that apartment. Yeah. And then I ate. I, distracted with things, not necessarily social media. I mean, in the early 2000s, it wasn't such a big thing, but I just distracted myself. And part of that mainly was eating. I would cook, I would bake, and I would eat. I would cook. And to me, that was speaking love, right? Because as a Brazilian, you show love by preparing good meals to people, by making good meals to people. So to me, that was love, but really it was also a lot of hiding that pain, I think, and that loneliness. I mean, it was comfort.
Wow. Wow. That is so sad and hard.
Yeah.
And my heart breaks for what you went through. Um, it's also, I'm really glad that we're talking about it. And I'm really glad because there are going to be people, Carina, who watch this video who are either therapists or not.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be people who have gone through their own pain, like we all have in different ways. I think I've told you this before, and I don't have to go into it now, but like for me, being a white male American, right, who has had and continues to have a lot of privilege and a lot of rank in my society, right? The way that I relate to this is that my challenge and my the hard thing in my life has been more emotional and psychological because I came down with depression when I was 17 or 18, and on and off in my life I've dealt with that, right, which has been
Mm-hmm.
brutally difficult. As you know, major depression
Yeah.
is difficult, but I don't have the experience of what you went through, which is more sort of because of the color of your skin, because of race, because of language, um, going through what you went through. However, this is what I would say is that when you talk about that, like when you say that you, for a period of time, years, that you were basically just spending time in your apartment, right? And that it was frightening or scary to even go outside. And you even had the experience, right, of going outside and getting lost and being frightened, right? To the extent that you wouldn't do it again. To me, now kind of shifting this maybe to this last few minutes that we have. See, I think that relates really well to the idea of attachment needs and longings, right? Because what we know in emotionally focused therapy and EFT, is that we know is that in relationships, people get sick and relationships get rough and negative cycles happen and people get sad and angry and relationships don't go well when individuals, which can be for lots of reasons, you know, experience that core emotional needs and attachment, yeah, core attachment needs aren't being met, like feeling safe, feeling loved, feeling understood, feeling like your partner has your back, feeling considered, all those things. See, but I think what you're talking about is that it's different but similar in that, and you tell me if I'm getting this right or wrong, is that you went through this social isolation and sort of cultural isolation, and then you suffered because of it. And one of the ways that it showed up was perhaps through the weight or your relationship to food. Um, You see, but I can only imagine, Karina, and this would be my question for you, that now as a therapist, right? Because you spend so much time, like I do, working with people, trying to help individuals and couples, right? I think that the idea of that we all have suffered, and like Christine
Mhm.
said, like that woman was carrying a lot of pain, right? I think that everyone carries some pain, whether it's small, medium, or large, right? I bet you, I would imagine that because of what you've gone through and because of what that it feels like to be socially isolated and to be in a new place and not know people and be scared, that I would imagine that gives you a unique perspective when it comes to empathy
Mhm.
and understanding for people that you work with who are suffering for whatever reason. Do you think?
Right. I think so, because I think you hit the right word, safety, right? If we think about safety, if we don't have safety in a relationship, you cannot be vulnerable, right? You
Right.
have to feel safe in order to feel vulnerable. And for my experience, and when you don't have safety, you build walls.
Mm,
You build walls that disconnect you from your partner.
right.
And that's exactly what happened to me. That, like, I think once that I learned English and started working, things started changing. But I built walls between myself and other people. And sometimes even with my husband,
Mhm.
because I didn't feel safe with other people. So for a good decade or so, I did not allow myself to have friends here. And because these people weren't safe to me.
Right.
So I had this, and I wouldn't be vulnerable. And I remember one time we went back to Brazil, and I think it was my child was little at the time, and she said, "You are so different here. Like your personality is so different." And I'm like, yeah, like I'm really outgoing. I'm so happy. We talk and we say things that here I'm like, whoop, nope, it's very surface level.
Right.
So safety ultimately is, if you want to be vulnerable, you have to feel safe in order to do that.
Yeah.
And if you want to build connections, you have to have vulnerability. So that's exactly what happened. I didn't feel safe, so I wasn't vulnerable. Because I wasn't vulnerable, I didn't build connections. And then if you don't build connections, you isolate.
Right.
So it's
Well,
just that
yeah.
snowball.
Yeah. You see, and I think that that's fascinating because you're exactly right. And that, you know, I can only imagine too that it must have been very weird emotionally and very difficult to be so dependent on your husband. I've met him and I can tell, I don't know him well, but I can tell that he's a good man. You would agree,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds like you two have a love thing going on, right?
He's a keeper.
He's very good. Um, that, yeah, that, I mean, this is what may sound weird, but I just thought to myself, like, I try to put myself in your situation that if I were like, it helps me better. Like if I were from Guatemala, right, and I have come to the States, and especially being a woman, which also has a whole nother level of marginalization and issues around rank and privilege and all of that, right? And that I think that if I had been in your shoes coming to live here, though, I would have definitely found um, satisfaction in my food. And I also would have always had my telenovelas, my Latino soap operas on. And I say that just because I in college actually took a wonderful class because I was a Spanish major and I took a class in La Telenovela Latinoamericana, which is
Yeah.
about soap operas in Latin America. And I know because I've spent so much time in places like Mexico and Guatemala how much culturally
Mhm.
the people love these shows, and they're wonderful. There's some amazing, and they're funny.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I imagine they probably have a lot of that in Brazil too, right?
Oh yeah, that's a huge part of our culture.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would, and I don't know if I'm thinking to myself, when you were here those first 2 or 3 years, did you even get to watch those?
I did not. I did not. That was, early 2000s, in fact, 2000. And I mean, we have a accessibility today that we didn't have back then.
Right.
So no, I didn't. But interestingly enough, that's how I kind of learned how to speak English, because I stayed home, right, for those first few months, and I turned on the TV, and there was Days of Our Lives. So I started watching. I didn't understand a word they were saying,
See,
and I
when I was growing up, my favorite was it was General Hospital.
yes, that one too. Yeah. And I remember telling my husband after a few months watching it, I started picking up words and understand things here and there. I said, "Oh my goodness, this telenovela, it's not like ending, doesn't, because in Brazil we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It ends just about 9 months time, more so. And he's like, oh, don't watch those. They are going to go forever and ever. And I'm like, those are I'm watching it. But I started picking up English. I mean, that kind of, it was fun, but I started learning that way. I would go to the library, get children's books with the cassette tapes that would go along and just listen and follow along the words. But telenovela was definitely a part of, I don't know, you guys call it soap opera, but the soap opera definitely was a part of this process of learning the language for sure for me.
Right. So let me see. You know how I always know that these interviews are going well? It's because the time flies by. I can't believe we're almost have to quit. But I would like to do this again if we could, because I think there are about 10 different things that you've talked about that I would love to talk more about.
Sure.
And I really do think, Carina, that one of the reasons why I'm finding this fascinating and I'm learning so much and I'm enjoying this with you is also that I think that, like, for me, being the fact that I am not a minority and I live here and I do have all of this this rank and privilege and all these things, hearing your story really helps me better understand what it's like, for instance, to be in this country, to be a person who may have a different skin color, the language. But I think it also helps me to better understand just this, what I call a universal, which is that there are lots of ways, right, that people feel disconnected from themselves or disconnected from others. And there are lots of people where people can feel unsafe with others, or like even with a culture or in a city. And so this is really, really wonderful. And I so appreciate it. But let me ask you this last question before we're done.
Okay.
If you were talking to a group of young therapists, right, and you were talking to them about working with clients who may be from a different culture, clients from South America, clients from other parts of the world, especially working with clients that are very different than you, meaning that if I'm the therapist, that are very different from me, because of what you went through, right, and what you've experienced, what would you give as advice to a therapist who, like let's say you had shown up as a client when you had been here for a year or 3 or 5 or 10, right? Maybe with a therapist who also spoke Portuguese, right? Like what would you tell a therapist to focus on and how to successfully, especially in what we do, right, which is working with emotion, to work with people who maybe have gone through some of the things that you've gone through?
I think two words that comes to mind. First is seeing. I think when we develop the ability to really see our clients, to really sit with them and their stories, all we want is to feel seen, right? I mean, there's many attachment needs, but all of us, no matter who we are, where we are from, what experiences we have, we want to feel seen, because when we feel seen, we feel that we belong. We feel that we are loved. We feel that we are part of this place. And when we feel seen, we also are able to tell our stories for what they are, which means that for the listener, for the other person on the other side, that judgment goes away.
Right.
Does that make sense? So feel
No, it
seen,
does. It
no
does.
judgment.
So really doing your best as a therapist to really maybe it comes through really listening, asking good questions, but with the goal that, like, for instance, you as a client would really feel seen, and maybe especially seen in the dilemmas and in the pain that you're experiencing, right?
Right. Yeah, good. I love that. I love that. Ask good questions to understand and to let them speak of their experience in their own words, not for judgment. Because as clients, no matter who they are or where they are from, when they walk in our room, they already walked with most of them with the stigma that they are broke, right?
Right.
Something's wrong with me. That's why I'm here in your room. Like I hear that at least once a week. And the truth is, I always think something's so right for you to be here because it takes so much courage for you to be here.
Yes.
So something is right. And when I tell my clients, I literally have no judgment. I mean that with every fiber of my being. Because whatever behaviors that they have, whatever they have done in their lives, it made sense for them.
Right.
It made so much sense. And now let's tease it out and make more sense so you can do better moving forward.
That's one of the things that one of my heroes and greatest teachers in EFT, who I know you're familiar with, was the New York therapist George Fowler.
Yeah.
George has this great phrase that I find myself saying over and over again, and that is that he'll say something like, when someone's trying to explain what they're feeling or thinking, or even if they're angry or they're lashing out or they're expressing really hard things, right? George will say, I may not, as the therapist, I may not understand completely why it is that you're saying those things, you're feeling those things. But the thing I do know is that, because I've been doing this long enough, I know because of attachment, is that you have very good reasons, very good reasons for feeling the way you do and saying the things that you say and doing the things that you do. And that part of what we're going to do together, hopefully, if you let me, is help me better understand what are these things, what are these reasons that push you to feel and think and act the way you do. I just love that.
Yeah, I truly believe that too. Because no matter what you do, if it's overeating, not eating enough, sleeping too much, having panic attacks, they make sense. And they are there for a reason.
Right.
Now let's explore that reason and let's get better tools to have better behavior or better responses to that distress in your life. Because maybe that's all you know how to do, right? You have a distress in your body and you eat. You have a distress or you go to sleep or whatever it is. But there are better tools to respond in a different way, but most people don't know that.
Exactly. And I think that okay, this is great. This is terrific. You're full of wisdom. You have, because you've been doing therapy for now, what, 1, 2, 3 years?
Oh man, so I have been, well, I went to school 2018, so that's my first year starting. So I feel like I'm still fairly new. So since 18, 19, 20, yeah.
Well,
And
here's what I would say about that. Sorry to interrupt, is just that
I find-
I've seen you work, Carina. I've seen you with clients. I've seen you in supervision. I've seen you in trainings. And one thing I do know is that, one, you're a very, very talented therapist, and that you get the EFT model, because you and I talk a lot about this. You get it, and you understand attachment. And I think the thing that you also really understand how to do, which is very hard to teach therapists, is how to have presence to be with people emotionally, Right.
Mhm.
So listen,
you.
we're gonna need to do this again, but before we sign off, could you tell people if therapists or clients or anyone wanted to see you, do therapy with you, or see anything you do online, where could people find you?
Yeah, so the EFTclinic.com, they can just look there for my profile. And they can find me on Instagram, Carina Wolff. So Carina Wolff, just like the animal, WOLF, underline therapy. Those are the two places
So
they
at Carina Wolff _therapy.
correct. Oh, thank you.
Or-
Underscore, not underline. Thank you. Yeah, underscore therapy. Yeah,
And then the same place where people can find me, which is www.theeftclinic.com.
correct. Yeah, my profile and cell phone number, my contact information is also there.
Great. Well, wonderful. Listen, my friend, thank you so much for.
Thanks, Ed. So fun talking to you.
Okay, we'll do this again soon, okay?
Sounds good. Have a good one.
Okay, you take care, and thank you folks for listening. Until next time, thank you.